Good evening, and welcome to the virtual Einstein Forum. We're actually, for the first time in nearly a year, recording from Potsdam, from an extremely hot Potsdam, although we're doing the session online, as we will for the rest of our program through July 2nd, and we hope to meet most of you back in the fall in real life. Arlie, are you there?
Yes.
I know you're there. Do you want to turn on your camera?
Yes.
Hi, it's my great pleasure to welcome Arlie Hochschild. She's an professor emeritus of sociology at the University of California at Berkeley. And most of you are here because you have either read or know of her prize-winning book, Strangers in Their Own Land. I very much look forward to hearing her talk about it tonight, and also reflecting on thoughts that she has had since she published that work, which was, of course, came out at a very strange time. It was just at the moment when everyone wanted to know what makes people tick who voted for Trump. There was a book by a sociologist who had spent 5 years researching among Tea Party supporters in Louisiana. And I'm very curious to hear what your further thoughts have been. Arlie will speak for about half an hour, and then I will get to ask her a couple of questions, but all of you who are listening are absolutely welcome to use the Q&A function if you're working in English, F and A if you're working in German, on the right-hand bottom corner of your screen, and I will read out all the questions. Arlie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure, Susan. You know, I'd like to start with this brochure that perhaps everybody has received. And it's about, there's a bridge, an incomplete bridge, something hopeful about this. You see that there are, machines and cranes. If you look and you see that you've gotten part of the way there, just a little more to go. This is a bridge, Hell's Gate Bridge in Queens, and the year is 1914. I think there's a lot said by the date of that bridge. And underneath, I think this brilliant brochure are the Furies. And this is, from Aeschylus, Eumenides, and there's no tools, no hope, no bridge, only raw, repressed emotion. So
I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. I am so delighted that you read our program so carefully. We're quite proud of it. The entire staff joins in to think about what pictures to use for what events and which events we highlight with a picture. But we did not think of using those images to highlight your talk. So I'm delighted.
I like to think of this as an empathy bridge and as an interpretive bridge. I mean, with what ideas can we grok kind of what is going on in the thoughts of the Furies on the other side? So good, but it's a brilliant job. So what I'd like to do in my half hour is first briefly recap a research project that began in 2011, lasted 5 years, and was reported in my book, Strangers in Their Own Land, and talk about the deep story that I described there, and then move forward to various chapters that of that story that we've been through up to the chapter we're in which I think there's a great deal of magical thinking. So as briefly as I can, I will say that in 2011, I found myself in Berkeley, California. It's a Democratic state. Berkeley, it's very liberal, progressive area, university. And I wanted to go as far into the far right as I felt I was exposed to here, where I live, where I've chosen to live. And that would, and there was great, so I went to the South, which was the center of this, of the Tea Party at the time, which was a precursor to Donald Trump. And I had in mind a red state paradox. How could it be that it's the poorer states, in a way, the have-nots of globalization since 1970? People with the least education, the lowest pay, most disrupted families, highest opiates, those were the states that were voting Republican. And those were the states that had sectors that were falling down since 70. And so I went in there thinking, well, why aren't you voting in your own interest, which would be the other party with all its flaws. But to make a long story short, I began to see how the world looked from their point of view through the use of a metaphor, what I call a deep story. And a deep story is something you take facts out of a deep story. You take your moral precepts out of the deep story. What you're left is your feelings, a distillation of your feelings about a situation that confronts you, that is salient to you. And you can tell it by a metaphor. You can tell it like a dream. If you're waiting in line, you now, a right-winger in Louisiana, working, let's say, in a petrochemical center as a pipe fitter, you're a male, you're white, and you're waiting in line for the American dream, which is the top of a hill. The line hasn't moved in 20 years. In fact, it's going a little backwards. And you feel like you don't begrudge anyone, you're a nice person, you obey the rules. But in a moment of the right wing deep story, someone's cutting ahead of you. Well, who would that be? That would be an African American. That would be a woman, me, that is through Title IX government measures finally given access to jobs that have been reserved for whites and men. And then you see environmentalists, and you see well-paid public sector workers all cutting ahead of you illegitimately and pushing you back. Another moment of the right-wing deep story, there is Barack Obama sort of waving to the line cutters. Oh, so the government is for them. He's not making this our government. We are being disenfranchised and not moving forward, we're moving back. Okay, and final moment, somebody ahead of you in line, maybe a university professor from Potsdam, is sneering at you and say, oh, you stupid, ill-educated, backward, racist, sexist, homophobic, fat redneck. And then that's it. You feel culturally cut off. You are now a stranger in your land. And actually, a later study found, a national survey found that answers to the question, Do you feel like a stranger in your own land? Next to voting Republican, saying, yes, I do feel like a stranger in my own land, was the strongest predictor for voting for Donald Trump. So that's chapter 1. We have grievance, that people feel they're losing their culture, doesn't matter anymore, their education, whatever that was, is devalued. Their demographic, the race they are is devalued, and their religion is devalued. It's a global sort of set of losses. It's a loss story, not a deprivation story. People I came to know were the elite of the left behind. They were not the abject poor. And so what we have in chapter 1, we'll say, is a not yet mobilized discontent and inchoate, but unhappy with their situation, with that deep story. So in chapter 2, that discontent, that grievance, becomes mobilized by Donald Trump. And one man described it to me, when Trump came, it was like lightning in a jar, the electricity of it. We're talking charisma now. And so in chapter 2 of this story, that grievance is mobilized, and we are talking about 74 million American voters voted Republican. That is 47% of the entire set of American voters. And the economic bones, I think, of this appeal of Donald Trump is that he's saying he will keep good jobs in, stop with one strong arm globalization itself, stop offshoring, and he will keep cheap labor out. So we can't forget the real interests involved here and the real economic promise here. We're talking about psychology. I will take it in that direction, but it goes along with the fact that a lot of blue collar whites in rural and semi-rural areas see an economic promise there. Hey, this guy gets it. That if you're not highly educated, not living in a city, we need some bigger help than the Democrats are even talking about. So, and it goes with, in this charismatic appeal, this mobilization, a promise of cultural restoration and strong leadership. You figure, well, look, the government can't do anything. It's small, it's puny. We need a person, at least, that's strong enough to get stuff done. There's a reason that they go for the symbols of strength and largeness that he had put forward. And there's a sense of being recognized in this chapter 2. I talked to a guy, it's in a different area, who had lost his job mining coal. And after he lost his job, he got an injury in a mine and he got on OxyContin, which is a very addictive drug. He became addicted, he lost his family, and he doesn't get to see his kids, can't pay child support. Big loss story, and an area in which this is very common. And he said, when I saw Donald Trump and he promised to bring coal back to this area, I knew he was lying, but I felt recognized anyway. So that's when charisma works. And this stage, this chapter 2, it does work. In chapter 3 of this deep story, so we're moving forward in time here, speech after speech. What he's really doing, this Donald Trump is saying, I am for you. I am your messenger. And you are for me. I love you. You love me. We are bonded. We are one. And then in chapter 3, there is a beatification of Donald Trump. That is, I think he insinuates himself into Christianity and its system of ideas and images. In a way, he's piggybacking on the story of Christ, I would suggest. So he's saying, oh, I suffer for you. I suffer for you. And in fact, I'm in my suffering, I have to do battle for you. I have to battle the treasonous press. I have to battle the deep state. I have to battle the Democratic Party for you. And then I think he touches Christian imagination. Even when he got COVID, now this may be a little too wild, and it is interpretive, okay, but we're looking at a deep psychology of a connection between a charismatic leader and a quite the elite of the despairing sector of the losers of globalization. That's what we're talking about. So I think we do need to go out on an interpretive limb here. And he's even suggesting his sacrifice for the country, that he's going to be crucified by his enemies, as Christ was. So chapter 3 of the deep story, moving right up to January 6th of this very year, Donald Trump has said to his 47% of Americans who voted for him, I fought for you, now you fight for me. Come forward down Pennsylvania Avenue and go into the people's house and take back democracy. Set, you are not to be a stranger in your own house. It's your house. And many people, I think, were mesmerized by the theater of it, being Donald Trump. I'd had a little theater, and it was an extremely serious breach of security and expression of distrust in fundamental architecture of American democracy. And the people that I've been talking to since this showdown, chapter 3 showdown, are saying, oh, we're against violence. Violence is terrible. Those people shouldn't have hurt the policemen, and they were wrong to go in, but I understand why they wanted to go there, show their support, and to express their distress with how America is. So they give that divided response to this, and embrace kind of politics of distrust. Now, in chapter 4 of the deep story, there is, I would say, disarray and confusion. Part of the hard right, those that went to the Capitol, are saying, well, wait a minute, no, we're we're the good guys. No, this must be Antifa, that, you know, let's blame the violence on somebody else. Let's displace that blame. And within that sense of disarray and the right-wing media playing that up, there is a gradual settling in of information about how all these state judiciaries and the Supreme Court have said, no, this wasn't a steal. There are then there is a division, and some people are in the 3 or 4 stages of grief, saying, you know, I was had this, and the hard right, they're saying, look, we were betrayed. You know, Donald Trump had 74 pardons, but not one of them was for the people that followed his orders and entered the national capital. So he's betrayed us, and there's a kind of a, okay, I got had a light version of that, heavy version of that. I don't know what exactly how to pin numbers to this, but if we look at some of the polls, we find that belief in Stop the Steal, that a movement that says, oh, we've been lied to, Donald Trump won. That's what he's been claiming. Among Republicans, just after January 6th, some 70% believed Donald Trump that this election was stolen. 70%. That is now down to 50% of Republicans who are believing that. So part of the story is a kind of sad realization that, hey, I was misinformed, and a giving up. They're not changing anything else. They still hold their beliefs. They're still, but as to whether the election was stolen, this being the emotional issue now, they're giving up. The others now are entering a kind of a magical chapter. And so what we're seeing is kind of a split in the Republican Party. And one guy I talked to said, well, you know, the Republican Party, there's country club Republicans and there are populist Republicans. He's a used car salesman. This guy is not, he's doing fine. But he says, no, I'm a populist Republican. So there's a split. And among the populist Republicans, there is a split between those who say, well, it's not as Trump said, and those who are entering, I think, a magical story. There are some 20% of Americans believe is that the government is not only evil, not only bad, but evil. That is, they believe in QAnon. So 20% of Americans believe in QAnon, and at its most extreme and raw, it believes that Democrats personally are satanic and run a pedophile ring, drink the blood of children. 20% of Americans would actually embrace this. And we interpreters, we were trying to really understand the other people on the other side of this bridge. Maybe tempted to say, well, that's nuts. And let's just leave it at that. my own invitation is to say, yes, it is nuts. It's a departure from reality. It's magical. And let's use the tools we have as sociologists of emotion and people drawing on psychoanalytic understandings of the mind. These people are, there's a lot of them, first of all, and they're, let's try and understand them. What I would say is first, magic is interesting. Magic is important. We've had magic before with witch burnings in early America. Someone said, "You're the witch," and burn her. With McCarthyism, in many times of history. What those times of history have in common is that a certain group of people are under great strain, and they're regressed, they're childlike, they live in a dream world. And this calls for a different kind of thinking. And I think it's not about social policy, what is good for the people or not. It's not interest analysis, although it is added to that. It's understanding of panic and displacement, and the construction of a parallel universe, and so we have to think emotion, think feeling, think fear, think despair, think humiliation, fear of being sneered at, and think of the idea of looking back at this magical belief. Children, that there are some adults, bad adults who are drinking the blood of children. We think, holy God, no, how can you believe that? Well, what if the children in this fantasy are a metaphor for adults? Adults who feel helpless and who feel betrayed. There's a kind of hyper villainization, of course, of liberals, but that's in any fairy tale, any magic, the evil stepmother, it's giving a poisoned apple to a child. And there is a sense, if we play with the idea of a metaphor, of betrayal by neoliberalism itself. Now, these are people, so they really have been betrayed in a certain way, and betrayed by automation. In America, that the workers aren't sitting on corporate boards and deciding which jobs get automated out or what kind of are the retraining programs working. There is a helplessness and abandonment, and a sense of betrayal by the government, to whom, like a mother, people feel free to blame. The government promises and doesn't deliver, is sort of the daddy of corporate life has left, and you're complaining to mom, the government, and feeling betrayed. Anyway, we are in the realm here of magic, and I just want to end with the idea, going back to the bridge, that metaphor may be, as an instrument of interpretation, fundamental to completing a bridge, at least of understanding that in metaphors we tap into the unconscious of those on the other side, so that we bridge builders can face the furies of 2021. Thank you.
What a lovely lecture and what a lovely reading of our program poster. Thank you. I have a couple of questions that are just purely factual, and then I have a large question. Factual is, you said that there's a split in the Republican Party. Why is that not noticeable in Congress? Do you have an explanation? They're sticking together incredibly, in particular to refuse to allow a commission for January 6th and all of that. It's quite shocking, the road that's been traveled since January 26th, when even Mitch McConnell made some quite harsh statements. So to me, it doesn't look like the party is as divided as one would hope it would be.
I understand. People I'm talking to are feeling like it's a split, and they feel like Mitch McConnell is not on their side, that he's too far left. I know that this is incredible to think.
Wait, they feel like Mitch McConnell is left?
Yes.
In what way?
Well, so who am I talking to? Okay, I'm talking to a right, white, blue collar, Trump enthusiast. And they're saying, oh, he's a country club Republican. He's just, he's pragmatist. And they couldn't forgive him for saying negative things about their sacred rescuer, Donald Trump. So I'm talking about a sentiment, and you're right, it doesn't show in Congress, but the sentiment is important because that's what all the senators have their ear to the ground. Are they going to be reelected? Yeah, there's a very strong pull to the right, but just as I fear the left isn't holding together very, by a toothpick, I think they aren't either. Yeah.
So let me ask you what's really my basic question when I read your book, and it remains so even after your talk. I know that if one goes to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, you will be told, well, feelings can't be false. Feelings are feelings, they're there, and they're important to acknowledge. But the work of a good psychotherapist is to bring the patient's feelings in line with reality. Mm-hmm. And my real question is, what if the deep story, it's not just magic in a kind of nice way, what if it's deeply wrong? And I want to bring in an example that it's unlikely that you will know, because I had to live for a very long time in Germany to understand this. It's very clear, but it's not something, of course, that people want to talk about anymore. After the war, the vast majority of West German citizens, it was somewhat different in East Germany, the vast majority of West German citizens sounded as if they were the defenders of the lost cause. They were full of grievance. They had lost the war. Their cities were in ashes. They were hungry. 7 million people killed, loss of territory. And on top of it, I think, the worst thing was exactly the humiliation. You can hear many people saying, as they said in the South, and as defenders of the lost cause still do say in the South, and on top of everything else, they blamed us for starting the war. Okay. Now, when one is confronted with this kind of a lost cause myth in the first 30 or 40 years of West Germany, it's quite shocking for a non-German to hear that, of course. And it's, I think we certainly wouldn't want to say, okay, we understand that they felt humiliated. They went out to be heroes, and then they became victims, and now they're being castigated as perpetrators. So we get the feeling of humiliation, but we certainly don't want to give credence to it. And I just wonder, for me, when I was studying these two groups of people, it was incredibly striking how much of the lost cause was in West German post-war consciousness. And I wonder what you think one can do when you're actually faced with a sense of grievance and a sense of humiliation, which, yes, psychologically, it's all very real, but it only has the most tenuous relation to reality.
Well, sure. I take your discussion here as both a question about the relevance of interpretation, and the other, practically, what do we do with people that are nuts? And so you're asking both things. I think, to be clear on the first thing, though, I got the sense from what you said, well, so should we really do this thing? Are we giving in? I think this is a common thing that when I give talks, I hear from the left. Well, yeah, empathy is fine, okay, but what we need to be is angry, and what we need to realize is this is a war, and these are evil people, and they may be good people, but they'll do evil things because they believe in fantasies. And let's get down to it. And shutting aside the importance or efficacy of really grokking what it is, your enemy, the other side, people who want things you don't, what they feel. And I come back that to that image of the bridge, and to I think the greatest political leaders we have, Nelson Mandela, for example. He really understood how the Afrikaners work. Did that make him an Afrikaner? He said, oh no, black rights don't matter? Of course not. But he was all the smarter in pursuing his goal of racial justice by entering temporarily the dream state of his enemy. So I guess I want to push back on you to go so quickly to the question of, well, they're stupid, they're wrong.
Wait, I didn't call them stupid. And I spent the better part of a year in 2016, 2017 in Mississippi, and I completely get the appeal of such people. I really do.
But I'm not seduced by it. It doesn't mean that
I'm not saying that you're seduced.
I'm involved in this.
Yeah, no, I'm not calling them crazy, and I'm not calling them evil, although those are words that I use in other contexts perfectly happily, okay? I'm simply saying, well, one thing, what does one do when a grievance story is deeply felt, but has really not much basis in reality? I mean, we see that with Donald Trump. Donald Trump really has nothing to complain about, except that he never made it from Queens into, sort of elite liberal Manhattan because he was so uneducated and obnoxious. He could have, it's only so that's the only grievance that the guy can possibly have.
But it's a very important one, and it saturates him. The man is grievance,
Sure.
is humiliation. He knows it from the inside. I think he has a learning disability. He doesn't read. So he knows about that feeling, but he turns that in brilliantly into an asset and how to relate to them. And if we didn't kind of think feelings, we wouldn't be knowing that. And we would be disempowered in our own effort to make a better world.
I just one last question. Then we have some questions in the chat, and everyone is invited to add some more. You mentioned Mandela. I remain in very many ways a great admirer of President Obama, which doesn't mean that I agree with everything that he did, but I admire him tremendously.
Sure.
Barack Obama really believed, and I believed it too, and the millions of people who went out and knocked on doors for him or donated or whatever believed that he actually would be that bridge builder, because he believed it too. And he had every good reason to believe it. White mother from Kansas, black father, the whole really unusual biography. And I was quite certain that that was how he would be seen. How do you explain? I mean, for example, I met people when I was in Mississippi and Alabama, and I would ask why the visceral reaction to Barack Obama. First they would be polite and they would say, well, I don't like his liberal policies. And I said, well, which liberal policies? And then eventually two different people, and I heard this from other African Americans in Mississippi, that they had heard it elsewhere. They were afraid he was going to exact revenge for what white people knew perfectly well had been happening in the South and elsewhere in the United States. And the first time I heard this, I said, but wait, he's been 7 years in office. It was 2016 still. He hasn't exacted any revenge, and his mother was white and his doesn't matter. He's going to exact revenge. Now, why do you think that was the reaction to someone who certainly had, as many of the personal qualities as Nelson Mandela did, and, one would have hoped an easier time given the different historical circumstances of apartheid South Africa and the United States. How do you read the reactions to Obama?
It's a great question. I think that what you say about Mississippians telling you, well, or implying that he's going to seek revenge, because I think that goes really to the heart of it. I think that's people's fear of him, and that he'll give out favors to the line cutters. To go back to that deep story. I think he was himself understandably and reasonably inhibited by another fantasy of the Black men. Oh, he's going to fight, he's going to be big, he's going to beat you up. And he purposely sidesteps that imagery. And he was mannerly, he was height of civilization. He was just the opposite.
The whole family was.
The whole family, let's on the up and up, as Michelle said, when they go down, go low, we go high. This sort of democracy and bridge building and diplomacy. So people didn't trust him. I think he almost didn't trust them enough to kind of come forward enough. But I think he was in a box. I think he's a miracle, and he is our Nelson Mandela. He's but given I share with you admiration for him, but I also think I see why he didn't come forward a little more on issues.
I mean, my own view is that he trusted them a lot, and he was shocked by two things that happened, one of which he talks about in the recent book, the so-called Beer Summit with Skip Gates, which was a huge shock that the word stupid should be applied to that. I mean, should cause such an uproar. But the second thing he doesn't talk about in the book, and it was something that really shocked me when he, this is '09, the Tea Party is just beginning to form, but it's not yet the force that it became. He still had a lot of goodwill that first year. And he announced that he was going to give a speech on the first day of school to high school students across the nation, which is something that Bush Sr. had done, and I now forget exactly, but it had been done by other presidents. Bush Jr. didn't do it. And anybody who'd read Obama's autobiography, the first one, would know exactly what he was going to say. He was going to say, my mother woke me up at 4 a.m. in Indonesia to make sure that I had extra English lessons. And if you study hard, kids, you too can become president of the United States. Totally anodyne American dream. So there were, maybe you remember this, there were thousands of people across the country who protested that they were going to take their children out of school rather than subject them to the socialist dogma of the new president. And there was a huge brouhaha. And finally, the White House released 2 days earlier a copy of the speech, which turned out to be just as banal as everybody had expected it to be. And it went on. But I see that point, certainly for me, and my guess is also for him, he mentions the Beer Summit, that was a real shock, that he began with a trust because, you know, he had these working class white people as his grandparents who basically raised him, that he did not come with an air of, you know, deep mistrust. And his trust got understandably chipped away.
You know, I think we have to sometimes turn to the image of the physical body for what goes on in the political body. In The Second Shift, which was a book I wrote on a very different topic, I was drawn to the metaphor of a shock absorber, that you can have strains out there in society, and then you have the family as and the wife and the husband as the shock absorbers of a larger strain. And it's going on societally. And so within marriage, you have strains, the origin of which is not in the particular individual, that husband, that wife. Oh, she's too finicky, he's too passive. You know, it gets personalized, but the origin of the problem is outside. And any political figure like Barack Obama is times 100 a shock absorber, of course, of these larger strains. He's the guy that has to receive those shocks and then interpretively almost do a jujitsu to handle them, to express them, to reinterpret them. And in every speech, he is building that bridge. He's trying hard. And he's one of our most brilliant leaders, but with a lot of shock to absorb.
Let me go to some of the other people. Mario Kessler reminds us, thank you, Mario, that it's today, 6 years ago, was the Charleston church massacre, as we talk about President Obama, one of his greatest speeches. Thank you for reminding us not to forget. There's a second comment from Mario Kessler. I read the book. The German equivalent to the waiting line is the escalator, on which you never get on, even if you always walk to the top. And he mentions a book by Andreas Reckwitz, which is available in English, if you are interested. This is from Nico Pironen. Are there any ways for the Democrats to reach the people who've opened the magical chapter? Does it even matter what the Democrats say in the situation where the whole Republican and radical right media infrastructure spoon feeds purposeful reinterpretations of what the Democrats actually said?
So the question is,
well, you're making an argument for bridge building, but if you have an entire media system which is bent on distorting what one side of the bridge is saying, is there any way to get through?
Okay, sure, that's a very important question. Let me back up and say that there are new gaps, social gaps, politics aside, between urban and rural people, between rich and poor people, huge, as we know, the yawning gaps. That also goes for Black and white people, Americans. So there are these disaggregations. And in the United States, we used to have institutions that did some mixing and matching across these social differences. We used to have the compulsory draft, right? So you have men of every class and every race, and they're getting to know each other. They're serving the country. And you used to have a vital labor union, labor movement. Again, there was, not always, but some crossover of social crossover. And we are missing those. And I think what we need to do is build more institutional kind of bridges, so that if there were a national job corps, everybody has to put in a year, do something, for example. I'm on the board of the new organization that mixes and matches high school kids. It's called the American Exchange Project. And so you get high school kids from Lake Charles, Louisiana, spending 3 weeks in the summer in Massachusetts, and you get the coasts inland and the inland to the coast. So there's a structure that makes that happen. It's like going abroad domestically. Well, what if you had that in college level too? So I think we need to think structure is the first thing. And the second thing is that you can teach kids civics, but you can also teach them how to talk across difference. I think that is something fundamental that education at its best does, and helps us kind of deal with the other, such as we've been brought up to think. And I've seen some people, and report them in strangers in their own land, who are really good at doing that. One, I'll just give you a case. Some people didn't believe that contamination was a problem. Okay, that having EDC in the water supply shouldn't have, that isn't a problem, and that you don't need regulators of petrochemical plants to us clean up the water. Okay, so they're suffering from it, but they don't believe in doing anything about it. How do you talk to a person like that? Well, you don't say, oh, I'm on the left, I believe in equality, I believe in regulating evil polluters. You don't do that. What you do is climb into what their ideology is. And I'll give you an example. There was General Russell Honoré, who was a hero rescuing the victims of Katrina in 2005 in New Orleans, big flood. And he was brilliant in many ways. And I watched him give a talk. He, in his retirement, has become an ardent environmentalist. And he's talking to people who are Republican, Trumpers, and whose key value is freedom. Freedom to start my own business, freedom to get rich, freedom from onerous regulations, free. And so he's talking to them. He's a Black guy, they're all white, they're businessmen. And I'm just watching, how on earth is this man gonna make a case? They don't want any regulation. How's he gonna do it? And here's what he did. He said, well, I woke up this morning and I looked at out at Lake Charles, and I saw a man in a boat, and that man had his fishing line out and his bucket was ready, but that man is not free to lift out an uncontaminated fish. Well, what had he, and I saw their postures loosen. I thought, hey, this guy's got something, because they are all fishermen, and they like to hunt, but can they eat what they kill, So he got them, this is the art of persuasion. So in addition to structural crossover mechanisms, we need to get good at what I would call, what he was doing was symbol stretching. You take their symbols, don't start with your own, start with theirs and stretch them in a way they don't. And that is one kind of, quote, trick in the bag of persuasion. And we all need to get good at it. Another thing is to look at who the credible communicators are on the right and refer to them or go to them. For example, a lot of the pipe fitters in the oil industry in Louisiana that I talked to said, I don't believe in climate change. No, I don't believe in it. But actually, they love the military. I said, actually, do you know what the Navy's doing about renewables? They really believe in climate change. They think that's what those solar panels they're leading the pack. So that changes their view.
Did that convince them, referring to the military?
Convince is a strong word, but I would say open. Mm-hmm. I felt, she's made a point I can hear. We have to be mindful of the hearability of our words. If the left is just in its cocoon and reaffirming its identity as a good guy, that's downward mobility. That's losing story. But if we're actually humbly, but strategically figuring out how the hearability of our words, then we're on the right track. And I also told this guy, you're CEO, you work here at Exxon or Sasol. But look, I've just found what the CEO just gave a speech, and he talks about climate change and the challenges. That's why they're diversifying their portfolio. So you've gone to whom they consider a credible communicator, and they can hear it. Your same old words become more hearable.
So here's from Misha Gabovich, also a sociologist who works at the Einstein Forum. You rightly point out that liberals often neglect the deep stories behind the behavior of many former Trump voters. Doesn't liberals' rational demeanor often hide a deep story of their own, rooted in experiences of injustice, discrimination, and humiliation? A story that, for emotional reasons, makes it difficult for them to empathize with the other side, leading to the angry response you just described. And if so, what would need to be done to heal liberals' own wounds and allow them to empathize with conservatives In other words, how can a regular liberal person become Nelson Mandela?
I love this question. It just is wonderful. So whoever you are, it's from
Dr.
Helena Clem. Oh, Helena, is that who that is?
No, that was from Dr. Misha Gabovich, who's a sociologist who works at the Einstein Forum.
Oh, wonderful, Ms. Gabovich. Thank you so much for that wonderful question. Yes, I take 2 points from you. One is that actually the left is injured and not good at hearing or dealing with people that don't confirm their worldview, and that comes from a fear of loss. I mean, a lot of people on the left are kind of first generation, or they've women, blacks who finally have managed to get a foothold in America's honor system, and think, oh no, this is all coming crashing down. Donald Trump is just slash and burn in everything we've spent our lives building. I myself, I do feel that. But it's led, I think, on the left. As I go around and talk to students, I feel sad that a great deal of good moral energy has become curled in on itself into a judging project of and assigning, it's almost grading, moral grading becomes a substitute for political action and a substitute for healing. There's something unhealed here. I tell you, one sign of it, I gave a talk at Louisiana State University. And I was scared. I thought, oh God, I said a lot of critical things about this state. But I went and they loved it. They said, you know what, you're not telling us anything new. We know we're in trouble on these things, but tell us how to get out of it. Nothing new, we know, we're not shocked. But then I gave a talk at Pomona College, very elite, very left kind of college. And
in Los Angeles, for those who don't know where it is, that's important.
In Los Angeles, right. And I was met very different perspective. Oh, you want us to go and talk to those racists? No, that would rub off on us. We're that fragile that we can't encounter a challenge. And I thought, we're in trouble here. This is a sign of downward mobility, of insulation. There's no curiosity and outreach. There isn't a robustness here. So it made me think that this last comment is we need to give much more attention to it. It's trenchant, true. And I don't think we're setting about to do the necessary repair work.
Somebody should maybe write a book called Left Fragility. I'm just making a note to myself.
Wow.
Good. Okay, we have another question from Mario Kessler. Construction of a parallel universe, but some 90 years ago, populist movements in the Deep South, see Huey Long, were not genuinely right-wing. You mentioned McCarthyism, but weren't the years 1955, 64, or 09, Obama's election, significantly more important, the key years of the civil rights movement? Mario apologizes for too many questions, but there are never too many questions if they're good questions.
Yeah.
That is from a historian.
Yes, it's so interesting about Huey Long, who was a populist leader and in Louisiana, and as your guest suggests, he wanted a chicken in every white pot and a chicken in every black pot. And when I asked some of my right-wing informants, who's the last good leader you can think of, Huey Long came up. So, and there's another little bridge we're not looking at there, possibly.
I mean, there were in the 1890s, there was, I'm not a historian, but there was a pretty strong, I've come to hate the word populist because I feel it doesn't mean anything anymore. But when it was originally used in the 1890s, there were quite strong labor unions or other labor organizations between Black and white workers in the South. Did you come up with any memory of that or any way to, appeal to that as a starting point or a point that one could look back to in history?
Yes. I'm on another research project in a different place, which has in Appalachia and dependent very heavily on coal. And the United Mine Workers is still a kind of a powerful memory, and it was where Blacks and whites got together. It's still in people's minds. And I actually got told by a woman whose grandfather died in a coal mine. She said, well, people have things wrong. They think of rednecks. Rednecks is someone who's racist, a racist white. He said, no, actually, she said, red was the color of the scarf that you wore. If you were working in a mine, it got issued to you by the company. And if you wore it, you weren't a scab and you were on strike. So, and you were doing it Black and white together. So she said, actually, the origin of the term reverses the meaning of it.
I have no idea.
So, yeah, I have run into a lot of people who feel sad and distressed to be labeled as racist, who aren't at all.
Well, that leads, well, I'm still waiting to see if anybody else would like to ask a question. The worry that I have that the left is making this, well, let's say both sides are making mistakes, but to make things worse, and that the distance between Pomona and Louisiana State is rapidly increasing, and it's not really because of Louisiana State. What do you have to say about that problem? Pomona, for those of you who have not been following the American discussion in the last 3 or 4 months closely, Pomona State is just a stand-in for a largely white coastal university, and the strongest, rather dogmatic insistence on a form of anti-racism that, Don McWhorter has a book coming out called Woke Racism, and I can't wait to read it because I've read some of his other things and listened to him. This is a Black author, and so it's easier for him to call out certain people in the anti-racist movement as actually being racist. I've now laid my cards on the table of where I stand on this fight, but it is a genuine problem in the United States. It sometimes comes across in the German media as cancel culture or identity politics. So I just wonder, I'm sure that you share the perception that the problem is increasing at the moment. I think Misha is right to say that its source is a deep wound that has not been acknowledged earlier. But I wonder if you have any ideas about what to do in the face of this really very growing gap. The bridge is widening, it's not coming together.
You know, I'm in the middle of a wonderful book by Ian Lopez called Lean Left, which, and he is the author of Dog Whistle Politics, and is focused on how to handle just these differences you've described. And he is very interested in what he calls the race class narrative. And he has gone out to a variety of states, works with a consortium of researchers, to look at appeals, what appeals work for moderate Republicans or any Republicans. And he compares three kinds of appeals. One is racist dog whistle, you know, welfare queens and crime in the streets. So there's one right-wing appeal. Look, we've got to lock up the criminals and get people off of welfare. That's kind of encoded dog whistle language, a kind of a right-wing appeal. So he's trying on these Republicans what they're going to vote for. And do they like that appeal? He compares that appeal, let's call it appeal one, with another appeal which just looks at class issues, you know, with jobs, jobs, jobs. Okay. And kind of language Biden's using now, jobs, jobs, jobs. Race blind. Okay. And that he compares, that's number two, with a third kind of appeal, which is a race class narrative appeal, where you say, yes, jobs, 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 and for everyone, and visually you portray a variety of colors. So what he has found is pretty exciting, pretty positive, that for moderate Republicans, actually, the appeal of a race class narrative is greater than for the straight out racist or the straight out class appeal. So you'll have to check out the book to see if I have this right. But I thought this is the way to go. I think it's we need to get past hand wringing and get out of our corners, but look at, as I think he is doing, at what they can hear, the hearability of words on that side.
That leads me, I see we have one more question, but I will come again. I just want to know if you have a short answer to this question, because your comment about the moderate Republicans and class and race surprised and pleased me very much. In thinking about these questions, I began to think that anti-communism in the United States is still one of the most potent political forces on the right. And I wonder if you, even, you know, among liberals, and I just wondered, it's something that hasn't really been addressed at all because it's so toxic, as we saw when Bernie Sanders, you know, praised the health system of Cuba, which is a pretty banal thing to do. I think that's what lost him the South Carolina primary, frankly. But I wonder if you have any ideas for how, or if you ever tried to address that piece of American ideology, or how that fits with your claim that actually Republicans are now willing to talk about class again.
Yeah, in the I think we're putting two things together. One is when people talk about communism, they go, "Oh, big bad, big brother state." I think the people I'm talking to, that is their.
Sure. Oh, they don't know anything. I mean,
whereas what these appeals that Lopez is trying out on moderate Republicans and others doesn't have to do with the state. It has to do with what the issues are. Who's gonna benefit from what you're offering, and so it leaves suspended the idea of who's gonna. Is it the state? Is it big business that's gonna offer it? So yeah,
I mean, my worry
does conjure up a sense of how helpless you are, the big government is, and
Okay, we have a question from Helena Flam. I still wonder how economic polarization, in the sense that one lost to a multicultural, woman-strong, strange world, can be bridged by institutions, programs, and the art of persuasion.
Bridging. Hi, Helena. As a friend, I'm glad to say hi to you. And you and I know that there's a role of emotional literacy that's called for in doing this bridging. So I previously talked about how to scale that up. And it's ever, as you say, more urgent. I can just reaffirm what you've said. I don't know if I have more to add.
If there is no one else who wants to add or ask something at this point, I'm going to say it's a hot night in Berlin-Brandenburg. And it's early, reasonably early in the morning in Berkeley. Arlie, do you have any last remarks that you'd like to make?
I think I've said it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to everybody who was with us. By the way, this is the moment to announce our next program. We still have a very full program in June. Let me suggest you not miss the event that we will have exactly a week from today with Stephen Greenblatt and Carrie Harrison, Shakespeare scholar, Shakespearean actor, as well as a writer, discussing a book of Stephen's which managed to describe pretty accurately Donald Trump's rise in administration through Shakespeare's plays without ever using the words Donald Trump. So that is something to look forward to a week from tonight, same time, same place. Thanks to all of you. And I hope we can meet sometime IRL, Arlie.
Great.